Most people spend their entire lives chasing happiness like it's something waiting for them in the future. They tell themselves, I'll be happy when I get more money, or I'll be happy when life finally settles down. But life has a strange way of never settling, and that perfect moment rarely comes. That's what makes the story of Ethan Cole so powerful, because Ethan didn't wait for life to be perfect to feel at peace. He lived differently. He thought differently. And most importantly, he chose differently. Ethan Cole lived in a small, worn-down apartment on the south side of Chicago. The walls were thin, the paint was chipped, and the heater made a strange rattling noise every winter night. It wasn't the kind of place anyone dreamed about living in, but to Ethan, it was enough. He had a bed, a roof, and just enough space to breathe. While others complained about what they didn't have, Ethan focused on what was still there. And that mindset made all the difference. Every morning, his day started the same way. No alarm clock screaming, no rushing out of bed in frustration. Just quiet awareness. He would open his eyes, stare at the ceiling for a few seconds, and take a slow breath. Not because he had nowhere to go, but because he understood something most people ignored. Waking up was a gift. A simple one, but powerful. And before his feet even touched the floor, he would whisper to himself, I'm still here. That's a good start. It wasn't that Ethan didn't have problems. In fact, his life was filled with them. He worked long hours at a small grocery store, barely earning enough to keep up with rent, groceries, and his mother's medical bills. His clothes were simple, often worn out. His shoes had been repaired more than once. But despite all that, he carried himself with a quiet calm that made people curious and sometimes uncomfortable. At work, Ethan was known as the calm one. While other employees complained about rude customers or long shifts, Ethan moved through his day with steady energy. He greeted people politely, helped without hesitation, and never raised his voice. Some co-workers admired him. Others thought he was strange. Jake, one of his closest co-workers, was somewhere in between. Jake was the opposite of Ethan in many ways. Quick-tempered, impatient, always reacting to everything life threw at him. If a customer was rude, Jake would complain for hours. If his shift was extended, his entire day was ruined. He lived in a constant cycle of frustration, always waiting for things to go his way. That's why Ethan fascinated him. One afternoon, after watching Ethan handle a particularly difficult customer with nothing but patience, Jake finally snapped. Bro, I don't get you, he said, leaning against a shelf. That lady was straight up disrespectful, and you're just standing there smiling like it's nothing. Ethan placed a box gently on the shelf and looked at him. It's not nothing, he replied calmly. It just doesn't have to control me. Jake frowned. What does that even mean? Ethan shrugged slightly. It means I can't control how she acts, but I can control how I respond. So, why let her ruin my day? Jake shook his head. Man, I wish I could think like that. Ethan smiled. You can. It just takes practice. That word, practice, stuck with Jake. Because for him, emotions weren't something you practiced. They just happened. You got mad, you reacted, and that was it. But Ethan treated his mind like something that could be trained, like a muscle that got stronger over time. Days passed, and Jake started paying closer attention. He noticed how Ethan handled everything, small problems, big problems, even silence. There was no rush in him, no unnecessary stress. It was like he moved at his own pace, untouched by the chaos around him. But life wasn't done testing Ethan. One morning, everything went wrong before the day even began. The heater stopped working overnight, leaving his apartment freezing cold. His alarm didn't go off, and by the time he woke up, he was already late. He rushed out, missed the bus, and had to walk through heavy rain just to get to work. By the time he arrived, soaked and exhausted, his manager was waiting. Ethan, this is unacceptable, the manager said sharply. You're late again. Most people would have tried to explain, to defend themselves, or at least show frustration. But Ethan simply nodded. You're right. It won't happen again. There was no argument, no tension, just acceptance. Later, Jake pulled him aside. Dude, you had every reason to be mad. Why didn't you say anything? Ethan wiped his hands with a towel and replied, because being mad wouldn't change what already happened. I was late. That's the truth. So I accept it and move forward. Jake stared at him, speechless. It sounded simple, but it wasn't easy. Not at all. That same day, something small but meaningful happened. An elderly woman dropped her groceries near the entrance. Bags split open, items rolling everywhere. People walked past without stopping, too busy with their own lives. But Ethan immediately stepped in, kneeling down to help her gather everything. Take your time, he said gently. Nothing's ruined. The woman looked at him with tired eyes. Thank you, son. People don't usually stop anymore. Ethan smiled. Maybe they're just in a rush. Doesn't mean they don't care. He carried her bags outside and waited until she safely got into her car. It was a small act, one that most people would forget within minutes. But for Ethan, it was part of how he stayed happy. He created moments of meaning instead of waiting for them. As the days went on, Jake began to understand something deeper. Ethan wasn't ignoring reality. He wasn't pretending life was perfect. He simply refused to let negativity take over his mind. He focused on what he could do, what he could control, and what still had value. But the biggest test was still coming. One night, Ethan received a call from the hospital, the kind of call that changes everything. His mother's condition had worsened. The doctors didn't say much, but the silence between their words said enough. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed after the call, phone still in his hand. For the first time, his smile faded, not completely, but enough to show the weight he was carrying. He stared at the floor for a long time, breathing slowly, processing the reality. When Jake came to check on him later, he expected to see a broken man. Instead, he saw someone quiet, reflective, but still standing. She's not getting better, is she? Jake asked softly. Ethan shook his head. No, but I still have time with her. Jake didn't understand. How are you thinking like that right now? Ethan looked up. Because focusing on what I'm losing won't help me. But appreciating what I still have, that gives me strength. That moment changed Jake more than anything else. Because for the first time, he realized happiness wasn't about circumstances. It was about perspective. And Ethan? Ethan had mastered that perspective. Even when life was at its hardest. Even when everything seemed to be falling apart. He still chose to stand with peace. And that was only the beginning of his story. Life doesn't test you when you're ready. It tests you when you're already tired, already carrying weight, already close to your limit. And for Ethan Cole, that next test came faster than anyone expected. A few days after the hospital call, Ethan walked into work like he always did, calm, steady, focused. But something felt off. The usual noise of the store seemed quieter, heavier. His manager avoided eye contact. A couple of coworkers whispered near the back room. Ethan noticed it, but he didn't react. He had learned long ago that not every situation needed an immediate response. Ethan, can you come to the office for a second? The manager called out. Jake, standing nearby, looked at Ethan with concern. Yo, that don't sound good, he muttered. Ethan gave a small nod. We'll see. Inside the office, the air felt tight. The manager cleared his throat, avoiding Ethan's eyes for a moment before finally speaking. Look, Ethan, I'm just going to be straight with you. The company's cutting costs. We have to let a few people go. Ethan listened quietly. And you're one of them. Silence filled the room. For most people, this would have been the breaking point. Losing a job when you're already struggling, when bills are piling up, when your mother is sick, it's the kind of moment that makes everything feel hopeless. But Ethan didn't react the way anyone expected. He simply nodded. I understand, he said calmly. The manager blinked, almost confused. You understand? Ethan gave a small, respectful smile.
Yeah.
It's not personal. It's business. There was no anger, no begging, no frustration, just acceptance. The manager handed him his final paycheck. I'm sorry, man. Ethan shook his hand. I appreciate the opportunity. And just like that, it was over. Outside, Jake was waiting. The moment he saw Ethan walk out with a small box of his things, he knew. Don't tell me, Jake said, his voice already rising. Ethan nodded slightly.
Yeah.
I'm done here. Jake exploded. That's messed up. You're the hardest worker here. They should have let someone else go, not you. Ethan leaned against the wall, holding the box casually. It is what it is. Jake stared at him in disbelief. Bro, say something. Be mad. Do something. Ethan looked at him, calm as ever, and said, Getting mad won't give me my job back. Jake ran his hands through his hair. Man, I don't understand you. Ethan smiled faintly. You don't have to. Just watch. That evening, Ethan walked home instead of taking the bus. Not because he wanted to, but because he needed time to think. The city moved around him. Cars passing, people rushing, life continuing like nothing had changed. And in a way, nothing had. The world didn't stop just because his situation got worse. But Ethan didn't see that as something cruel. He saw it as something freeing. Because if the world kept moving no matter what, then so could he. When he reached his apartment, he sat down quietly. No TV. No distractions. Just silence. He looked around the room. Same walls. Same worn furniture. Same life. But now, without a job. For a brief moment, just a brief moment, he felt it. The pressure. The uncertainty. The what now? But instead of running from that feeling, he faced it, took a deep breath, and said out loud, Okay, this is where we're at. No denial. No panic. Just truth. Later that night, Jake showed up unannounced. Yo, I brought food, he said, walking in without waiting. Ethan chuckled slightly. You always do that. Jake dropped the bag on the table. Man, I've been thinking about this all day. You really not stressed? Ethan sat down across from him. I am. Jake paused. You are? Yeah, Ethan said. I just don't let it take over. Jake leaned forward. How? Ethan thought for a moment, then said, Because stress doesn't solve problems. Action does. And right now, I need a clear mind to figure out my next move. Jake shook his head slowly. You built different, bro. Ethan smiled. Nah. I just learned the hard way. Jake's eyes narrowed. What you mean? For the first time, Ethan leaned back and looked away, like he was about to open a door he usually kept closed. My life wasn't always like this, he said quietly. Jake didn't interrupt. Ethan continued. A few years ago, I wasn't calm. I wasn't patient. I used to get angry over everything. Small things, big things, it didn't matter. What changed? Jake asked. Ethan's voice dropped slightly. I lost everything. The room went silent. Ethan looked down at his hands. I used to have a better job. More money. Bigger plans. I thought I had control over my life. He paused. Then 1 year, everything hit at once. Lost my job. Got into debt. My mom got sick. And on top of that, I pushed away the few people who actually cared about me because I was always angry. Jake listened closely. I kept thinking life was unfair, Ethan said. I blamed everything, people, situations, luck. But all that anger? It didn't fix anything. It just made everything worse. So, what did you do? Jake asked. Ethan looked up. I got tired. Not physically, Ethan continued. Mentally. Emotionally. I was tired of being miserable. Tired of letting every problem control how I felt. He leaned forward slightly. So one day I made a decision. A simple one. Jake waited. I said no matter what happens, I'm not letting life take my peace again. Jake sat back, absorbing every word. That's it, he asked. Ethan nodded. That's it. But living it, that's the hard part. Ethan stood up and walked to the window. Life didn't suddenly get better after that, he said. If anything, it stayed difficult. But I changed how I saw it. He turned back to Jake. I started focusing on what I still had instead of what I lost. I started controlling my reactions instead of blaming situations. And slowly, things changed. Jake crossed his arms. So, you're telling me happiness is a choice? Ethan shook his head slightly. Not exactly. Jake frowned. Then what is it? Ethan smiled. It's a habit. Jake went quiet. Because that hit different. A habit, something you build, something you practice, something you choose over and over again. That night, Jake left with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Ethan wasn't just staying positive. He had trained himself to live differently. The next morning, Ethan woke up just like always. Same ceiling, same small apartment, same problems. But instead of thinking, I lost my job, he thought, I have time to figure out something better. Instead of thinking, everything is falling apart, he thought, this is just a new phase. And that shift, that small shift in perspective, that's what kept him standing. But life wasn't done testing him yet, because the next challenge would push him further than ever before. And this time, it wouldn't just test his mindset, it would test his strength. The real test of a person's mindset doesn't come when things are calm. It comes when pressure builds, when options disappear, and when life gives you every reason to break, but you choose not to. For Ethan Cole, that moment was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Days passed after he lost his job, and reality began to settle in. Rent was due soon. His savings were already low. His mother's medical bills weren't slowing down. Every logical sign pointed towards stress, panic, and fear. But Ethan still woke up each morning the same way, slow breath, quiet awareness, and one simple thought: I'm still here. That didn't mean things were easy. One morning, he opened his kitchen cabinet and paused. Almost empty. Just a few basic items left: some rice, a can of beans, and half a loaf of bread. For a brief moment, he stood there, staring at it. Most people would have felt frustration rising. Ethan felt it too. But instead of letting it grow, he smiled slightly and said under his breath, "All right, we'll make it work." And he did.
That was his pattern.
Not ignoring problems, but adapting to them. Later that day, he headed out to look for work. No complaints. No hesitation. Just action. The streets of Chicago felt colder than usual, even though the weather hadn't changed much. Maybe it was the uncertainty. Maybe it was the pressure. But Ethan didn't let that slow him down. He walked into store after store, asking for openings, filling out applications, shaking hands, and thanking people, even when they said no. "Sorry, we're not hiring." "No problem. Appreciate your time. Try again next month." "I will. Thank you." Rejection after rejection. But no change in attitude. By the afternoon, his feet were tired, and his stomach was starting to remind him he hadn't eaten much. He sat down on a bench outside a small cafe, watching people move through their day.
Couples laughing.
Friends talking. People glued to their phones. Life going on. He leaned back and looked at the sky. "Still breathing," he whispered. And somehow that was enough to keep him steady. Just as he was about to get up, someone approached him. "Ethan?" He looked up. It was Lisa, an old friend from years ago. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. "Lisa," he said, surprised. She smiled. "Wow, it's really you." They talked for a few minutes, catching up. Lisa had moved forward in life. Steady job, stable routine, things looking good on the outside. But as they talked, she noticed something. Ethan still had that same calm presence. That same grounded energy. "How are you always so peaceful?" she finally asked. Ethan smiled. "I practice." She laughed softly. "That again? You always say that." He nodded. "Because it's true." Lisa hesitated, then asked, "So, what are you doing these days?" Ethan didn't hide anything. "Just lost my job. Looking for the next one." Lisa's expression changed. "Oh, I'm sorry." Ethan shrugged lightly. "It's okay. Just part of the process." She studied his face carefully. No panic. No stress. Just acceptance. "You know," Lisa said slowly, "my company is hiring. It's nothing big, but it's something stable. I could recommend you." Ethan nodded. "I'd appreciate that." Simple. No desperation. No overreaction. Just gratitude. A few days later, Ethan got the interview. He walked in with the same calm energy he carried everywhere. No nervous rush. No pressure to impress. Just honesty. When they asked him questions, he answered clearly. When they asked about his situation, he didn't complain. I've faced some challenges, he said, but I've learned how to stay focused and keep moving forward. The interviewer noticed something different about him. Not just his answers, but his presence. 2 days later, Ethan got the call. You're hired. For most people, this would have been a huge emotional moment. Relief.
Excitement.
Celebration. Ethan? He smiled. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Calm.
Grounded. Present. That evening, Jake came over again. You got the job? He shouted. Ethan laughed.
Yeah.
Jake threw his hands up. Man, I swear, everything works out for you. Ethan shook his head. Not everything. Jake frowned. Then what is it? Ethan looked at him seriously. I just don't fall apart when things don't work out. That line hit deep, because Jake realized something important. Ethan wasn't lucky. He was stable. But just as things started to look better, life delivered its hardest moment yet. A few nights later, Ethan got another call from the hospital. This time, it was different. The tone, the silence, the weight of it. He already knew. At the hospital, everything felt still.
Too still.
Machines. Quiet footsteps. Low voices. Ethan walked into the room slowly. His mother lay there, weak, but peaceful. He sat beside her and held her hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she looked at him. You're still smiling, she said softly. Ethan nodded. Because you taught me how. Tears filled her eyes. Are you happy? She asked. Ethan took a deep breath. Not a forced answer. Not a fake one. A real one. Yes, he said quietly. Even now. She smiled. And in that moment, there was no fear. No regret. Just peace. That night, Ethan walked out of the hospital alone. The city lights blurred slightly through his eyes. Not because he was breaking, but because he was human. He stood outside for a long time, breathing, processing, feeling everything, but not losing himself in it. And then he said something quietly, something that defined his entire life. Pain is part of life, but peace is my choice. That was Ethan's truth. Not that life is easy, not that bad things don't happen, but that no matter what happens, you still have the power to choose how you carry it. Some moments in life don't just test you, they define you. For Ethan Cole, standing outside that hospital, the world felt quieter than ever before. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that forces you to face everything inside you. The kind where there's no distraction, no escape, just you and your thoughts. His mother was gone. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't smile. Not because he had forgotten everything he believed in, but because even the strongest mindset doesn't erase pain. He stood there under the dim streetlight, hands in his pockets, breathing slowly. The city moved around him like always, cars passing, people talking, life continuing without pause. And that was the hardest part. The world doesn't stop when yours does. But Ethan understood something most people don't. Pain is not the enemy. Losing yourself in it is. The next few days were quiet. Very quiet. Ethan handled everything alone. Arrangements, paperwork, small details that nobody prepares you for. Jake stayed close, checking in, trying to help however he could. But even Jake noticed something different. Ethan wasn't pretending to be okay. He was simply allowing himself to feel. That was new. One evening, Jake sat across from him in that same small apartment. You don't have to be strong all the time, Jake said carefully. Ethan nodded. I'm not trying to be, he replied. Jake frowned slightly. Then how are you still so steady? Ethan looked down for a moment, then said something that would stay with Jake forever. Because I don't fight reality anymore. Jake didn't fully understand. So Ethan explained. When something painful happens, most people resist it, he said. They keep thinking, this shouldn't have happened, this isn't fair, this isn't how it's supposed to be. And that resistance, that's what creates suffering.
He paused.
But when you accept that life includes pain, you stop fighting it. And when you stop fighting it, you can finally carry it without breaking. Jake leaned back, silent. Because for the first time he saw the full picture. Ethan wasn't happy because life was easy. He was at peace because he stopped expecting it to be. Weeks passed. Ethan returned to his routine.
New job.
Same mindset. But now, there was something deeper in him. A quiet strength. The kind that only comes from loss, reflection, and acceptance. One afternoon at work, a customer lost his temper over something small. Loud voice. Angry tone. Blaming Ethan for something completely out of his control. Jake, who had recently started working at the same place, stepped forward, ready to argue back. But Ethan gently raised his hand. "It's okay," he said. He turned to the customer. "I understand you're frustrated," he said calmly. "Let's figure this out. No ego. No reaction. Just presence." The situation de-escalated within seconds. The customer left calmer than he arrived. Jake stood there, shaking his head. "I would have lost it," he admitted. Ethan smiled slightly. "I used to." Jake looked at him. "So what changed, really?" Ethan thought for a moment, then said, "I realized life isn't happening to me, it's happening around me, and I get to decide how I move through it." That was the final piece. Not control over life, but control over self. Months later, things slowly improved. Ethan stabilized financially, built a simple, steady routine. Nothing flashy, nothing extraordinary, but peaceful,
Consistent. Real.
One evening, Jake and Ethan sat on a rooftop, overlooking the city. The same city that once felt overwhelming, now felt manageable. Jake looked at him and said, "You know, I've been trying to live like you." Ethan laughed softly. "Don't live like me. Just understand yourself." Jake shook his head. "Nah, you changed something in me."
He paused.
"I don't react the same anymore. I don't stress over small stuff like before. And for the first time in a long time, I feel calm." Ethan nodded. "That's it," he said. "That's the goal."
Jake looked out at the skyline.
"So, what's the secret then?" he asked. "If you had to say it in one sentence." Ethan leaned back, looking at the sky. And after a few seconds, he said, "Happiness isn't about having a good life. It's about having a strong mind." Silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It was full of understanding. Because in the end, Ethan didn't change his life overnight. He changed how he saw it. And that changed everything. Life will test you. It will disappoint you. It will take things away from you. But no matter what happens, you always have one thing left. Your response. You can choose anger or acceptance, stress or patience, negativity or perspective. Because happiness isn't something you wait for. It's something you build. Every day. In every situation. No matter what. And if there's one thing Ethan's story proves, it's this. You don't need a perfect life to be happy. You just need a peaceful mind.